Hello aspirants, welcome to Insights IAS Current Affairs. So what's on our agenda today? We'll begin with the life and legacy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Then we will move to the economy and discuss two important topics: the Startup India Fund of Funds 2.0 and the concept of a windfall tax. After that, we'll look at a social initiative called the eSafe Hair program. And finally, we'll cover a defense exercise, Dust Lick, and an important location for your mapping practice, Raimona National Park. So these are the topics we'll be covering. Let us begin with the first topic. Our first topic for discussion is Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, popularly known as Baba Saheb. Now, the context here is that the nation recently commemorated his birth anniversary, and as we all know, he is revered as the chief architect of the Indian Constitution. He was a jurist, economist, social reformer, and politician. He was also the first Law Minister of Independent India and the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution. He dedicated his life to the struggle against social discrimination and the upliftment of the Dalits, women, and laborers. Let's quickly trace some of the key milestones in his life. He was born on April 14, 1891 in Mahau, Madhya Pradesh, into a Mahar, that is, Dalit, family. His early experiences with caste discrimination were severe. He was forced to sit on the floor in school and was denied access to common water sources. These experiences really shaped his entire life's work. He was also a brilliant student who earned doctorates in economics from Columbia University and the London School of Economics, making him one of the most highly educated Indians of his time. A pivotal moment was in 1927 when he led the Mahad Satyagraha. This was a non-violent protest to assert the right of untouchables to use water from the public Chandar tank in Mahad, a truly foundational moment for civil rights in India. Then, between 1930 and 1932, he represented the depressed classes at all three round-table conferences, where he was a powerful advocate for their rights, famously arguing for separate electorates. These separate electorates were later converted to reserved seats via the Pune Pact. Another very important contribution was his role in constitutional architecture. As chairman of the drafting committee, he harmonized various perspectives to create a document that abolished untouchability and introduced affirmative action. A crucial event to remember is his resignation from the cabinet in 1951. This was a matter of principle, as he resigned when the Hindu Code Bill, which sought to provide women with property and divorce rights, failed to pass initially. So this also reflects his strong commitment to gender justice. His contributions were truly immense, and his writings are often a focus area for prelims. You must note down Annihilation of Caste, published in 1936. It's his powerful critique of the Hindu caste system and its religious basis. Another extremely important work, especially from an economic perspective, is The Problem of the Rupee, its origin and its solution. Why is this so significant? Well, the core ideas from this book influenced the conceptualization of the Reserve Bank of India. You must also note two more important works: The Untouchables, who were they and why they became untouchables, and The Buddha and His Dhamma, a reinterpretation of Buddhist philosophy that was published posthumously. And finally, on October 14, 1956, at Diksha Bhumi in Nagpur, he converted to Buddhism along with 500,000 followers, seeking a faith based on equality and dignity. And in the same year, on December 6, 1956, he passed away in his sleep at his home in Delhi, an event that is commemorated as Mahaparinirvan Divas. Beyond his writings, he was also a great champion of labor rights. He was instrumental in introducing reforms like the 8-hour workday, maternity benefits, and equal pay for equal work. His insights also laid the foundation for the Finance Commission and India's federal structure. Now let's look at his core significance. He famously argued that political democracy is a facade unless accompanied by social and economic democracy. This idea remains central to understanding his vision for Indian society and governance. Now let's look at his core significance. Beyond his writings, he was also a great champion of labor rights. He was instrumental in introducing reforms like the 8-hour workday, maternity benefits, and equal pay for equal work. His insights also laid the foundation for the Finance Commission and India's federal structure. He famously argued that political democracy is a facade unless accompanied by social and economic democracy. This idea remains central to understanding his vision for Indian society and governance. Alright, let's move on from polity to a topic in the economy. We'll be discussing the Startup India Fund of Funds 2.0, also written as FOF 2.0. This is an important scheme that was recently notified by the government on April 13, 2026. So, what exactly is this scheme? It's a fund of funds. Now, this is a very important distinction to understand for your exam. The fund of funds does not invest directly into startup companies. Instead, think of it as a chain. The government puts money into this fund of funds. This fund then invests in various other funds, which are called SEBI-registered alternative investment funds or AIFs. And it's these AIFs that then go out and invest in the actual startups. So it's an indirect funding mechanism. And this is the second version of the scheme, building on the first one from 2016. Now for prelims, these are the core facts you absolutely must remember. First, the nodal department. It's the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade or DPIIT. The main objectives are to bridge that critical funding gap that many startups face in their early and growth stages, to mobilize private venture capital by providing a cornerstone government commitment, and to foster innovation-led growth specifically in globally competitive technologies and manufacturing. Any of these facts could be framed as a direct question. Let's look at the key features of the scheme. The total corpus is quite substantial, rupees 10,000 crore, and it's planned for the long term, spanning the 16th and 17th Finance Commission cycles. The scheme focuses on deep tech, innovative manufacturing, and early growth stage startups supported by smaller AIFs. Now, while it has a special focus on these areas, it's important to remember that the scheme remains sector agnostic. This means it has the flexibility to support startups across various sectors and stages. The selection process follows a structured screening involving the VCIC to ensure high-quality fund selection. There is also a co-investment framework, which includes provisions for the government and institutional investors to co-invest under an umbrella framework with strict governance safeguards. A key compliance point to remember for potential questions is that the funds it invests in must be SEBI-registered AIFs. Also, the companies that finally receive the investment must be officially recognized as startups by the central government. These mandatory requirements are important. Now, coming to the significance. By funding startups that build globally competitive products, the scheme aims to reduce reliance on foreign technology and imports. It is also expected to generate high-quality jobs by scaling up technology-driven manufacturing and services. Moving on, our third topic is a very important social initiative. It's called the e-Safer program, and it was launched by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. It addresses a very critical need in our society today. So, what is the e-Safer program? It's a specialized cybersecurity awareness training program, but it's specifically tailored for rural women. It operates under a larger framework called the Information Security Education and Awareness or ISEA framework. The core idea here, and this is what makes it unique, is its implementation model. It is peer-led and community-based. This means it promotes digital safety through trusted members of the community itself, bridging the gap between digital access and digital security. Alright, let's look at the core facts for prelims. The nodal ministry, as I mentioned, is Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. The target is ambitious: to empower 1 million women across rural India by 2029, enabling them to participate safely in the digital ecosystem over the next 3 years. The program also aims to strengthen last-mile cybersecurity awareness for women engaged in digital financial transactions and online livelihoods, and to create a gender-responsive and sustainable model for cyber-safe digital inclusion. But the heart of this program is its core model, which is the Cyber Saki or Cyber Friend peer educator model. The program trains women to become Cyber Sakis, who then act as peer educators within their local communities. This keyword Cyber Saki is very important for the exam because it highlights the community-driven approach, and the ultimate aim is to strengthen cybersecurity awareness right down to the last mile in our villages. Now, how is it being implemented? CDAC is responsible for developing localized audio-visual training content and materials. Importantly, this is being done in multiple Indian languages to ensure accessibility. The program also leverages the existing networks of women's self-help groups or SHGs to reach the remotest rural regions without requiring new infrastructure. It also uses a blended learning approach, combining structured technical training with community-based interventions and audio-visual modules to drive measurable behavioral changes. The program is being rolled out in phases, starting with Madhya Pradesh and Odisha, before scaling nationally. Insights from the initial implementation will then be used for policy integration and replication with other partners across the country. Now coming to the significance. This initiative ensures that women are not just online but are securely online, protecting them from rising cyber risks like financial fraud and identity theft. By building confidence in digital transactions, the program enables women to utilize digital platforms for their livelihoods and micro-enterprises. And ultimately, this contributes to the broader vision of a cyber-secure Bharat by extending cybersecurity awareness right down to the grassroots level. Next, we will discuss an economic concept called windfall tax. This has been in the news because oil marketing company stocks such as IOC, BPCL, HPCL, and Reliance came under pressure after the center sharply increased the windfall tax on diesel and ATF exports. This decision came after global crude oil prices crossed $100 per barrel, triggered by West Asia tensions, which resulted in unexpectedly high profits for oil companies. So, what exactly is a windfall tax? A windfall tax is a higher tax rate levied by the government on specific industries or companies when they experience sudden and unusually large profits, often referred to as windfall gains. These gains occur due to favorable external conditions, rather than the company's own business maneuvers or investments. In the energy sector, such gains typically occur when global geopolitical tensions drive up crude oil and fuel prices. Now, what is the aim of this tax? The first aim is to ensure that extraordinary profits resulting from global crises are shared with the public exchequer. The second aim is to help the government fund subsidies or social programs which mitigate the impact of high fuel prices on consumers. And finally, it aims to generate additional revenue for the government during periods of economic or geopolitical instability. Now, let us understand how this tax works. The tax is generally implemented as a levy on the export of fuels or the production of domestic crude. The government monitors global prices, such as Brent crude, and when prices exceed a certain threshold, the excess profit per unit is taxed. It is also important to note that different tax rates are applied to different products under this mechanism. Another important feature is that the tax rates are reviewed every fortnight, that is, every 2 weeks, based on the average international price and refinery margins from the previous fortnight. This makes the tax dynamic and responsive to changing market conditions. Now let us look at the key features of windfall tax. First, it is temporary and dynamic in nature. Unlike standard corporate tax, windfall tax fluctuates and can even be reduced to zero if global prices fall. Second, in India, it is implemented as special additional excise duty, specifically targeting exports of fuels to ensure domestic fuel availability before companies seek higher profits abroad. Third, small-scale producers or companies meeting domestic supply mandates may receive exemptions or lower rates. Fourth, changes in tax rates are notified via the Gazette and take effect immediately to prevent hoarding or preemptive exports. Now let us understand the significance of windfall tax. It provides a significant non-tax revenue stream for the government, without increasing the tax burden on the general public. It also reinforces the idea that natural resources belong to the nation, and their exploitation during global crises should benefit the domestic economy. For the exam, remember that windfall tax is a temporary, dynamic tax imposed during extraordinary profit situations, especially in the energy sector. And in India, it is implemented through special additional excise duty. Alright, let's move to a topic from international relations and security. We are going to look at the joint military exercise Dust Lick. The context is that the Indian Army contingent has departed for Uzbekistan to participate in the 7th edition of Joint Military Exercise Dustlik, scheduled to be held at the Gurum Sarai Field Training Area in Namangan. So, what is Exercise Dustlik? Exercise Dustlik is a premier annual bilateral military training exercise conducted between the Indian Armed Forces and the Uzbekistan Armed Forces. It serves as a platform for sharing operational experiences and refining combat tactics in diverse environments. The participating nations are India and Uzbekistan. This is important from a prelims perspective. This year, the host is Uzbekistan, specifically the Gurum Sarai Field Training Area in Namangan. Another important point is that the exercise is held annually and the location alternates between India and Uzbekistan. For reference, the 2025 edition was held in Pune, India. Now, let us understand the aim of the exercise. The primary objective is to foster deep military cooperation and enhance the combined capability of both forces to execute joint operations in semi-mountainous terrain. It also focuses on improving physical fitness, joint planning, and the synchronization of special arms skills. Now, let us look at the key features of the exercise. The exercise includes operational drills such as land navigation, strike missions on enemy bases, and the seizure of enemy-held areas. It also focuses on command and control coordination, where both sides establish a unified operational algorithm to ensure seamless joint planning. Another important feature is the sharing of tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, where both sides familiarize themselves with each other's operational procedures. The exercise concludes with an intensive 48-hour validation exercise, designed to test tactical drills for neutralizing unlawful armed groups through joint special operations. A notable feature is that the exercise involves both Army and Air Force components from both countries, which helps improve inter-service synergy. Now let us understand the significance of the exercise. Central Asia is part of India's extended neighborhood, and Exercise Dustlik is a vital pillar of India's strategic outreach to Uzbekistan, which is a key regional player. It also strengthens the ability of both militaries to work together under a unified command, which is essential for future peacekeeping or joint security missions. For the exam, remember the key points. Exercise Dustlik, India and Uzbekistan, annual exercise with alternating locations, semi-mountain terrain training, and Gurum Sarai Field Training Area in Namangan, Uzbekistan. And for our final topic today, we have an important location for your mapping practice, Raimona National Park in Assam. Raimona National Park was recently in the news because a new species of gecko named Certodactylus raimoniensis was discovered in a forest fragment near Assam's Kokrajhar district, close to the park. So, what is Raimona National Park? Raimona National Park is a critical conservation area in India that serves as a gateway to the Eastern Himalayan biodiversity hotspot. It is also integral to golden langur conservation efforts. Now, let us look at its location, which is very important for prelims. The park is spread across the Gosaigaon subdivision of the Kokrajhar district, within the Bodoland Territorial Region or BTR of Assam. It lies roughly 53 kilometers from Kokrajhar and about 253 kilometers from the state capital Guwahati. Now, let us look at its history. Raimona National Park was officially declared as Assam's 6th national park on World Environment Day, June 5, 2021. Before becoming a national park, the area was part of the Ripu Reserved Forest, which suffered from decades of insurgency and habitat degradation. Its creation marked a significant shift toward restoring ecological stability in the westernmost part of Assam. Now let us look at the key geographical features which are very important for mapping. Raimona National Park forms a transboundary conservation landscape along with Bhutan's Phibsu Wildlife Sanctuary and West Bengal's Buksa Tiger Reserve, covering more than 2,400 square kilometers. The park is located in the southern foothills of the Eastern Himalayas, with an altitude ranging from 85 meters to 1,042 meters above sea level. It is bounded by the Sankosh River in the west and the Saralbhanga River in the east, which help create moist, shaded habitats and perennial streams. The ecosystem of the park includes Himalayan moist mixed deciduous forests, Terai Duar savanna, and evergreen forest patches, providing diverse habitats for wildlife, including the newly discovered gecko species. Now, let us understand the significance of Raimona National Park. First, it is located at the confluence of two global biodiversity hotspots, the India-Burma hotspot and the Eastern Himalayas hotspot. Second, it is one of the most vital habitats for the golden langur, an endangered primate endemic to this region. Third, the park serves as a crucial elephant corridor, allowing Asian elephants to move between the plains of Assam and the hills of Bhutan. So, for prelims, remember the key points. Raimona National Park in Assam, Kokrajhar district in Bodoland Territorial Region, Sankhosh and Saralbhanga rivers, golden langur habitat, and transboundary landscape with Bhutan and West Bengal. So, as a quick tip for organizing your notes, you can group today's topics thematically. For instance, the Fund of Funds 2.0 and the eSafer program can be placed under GS2 governance. The windfall tax would fit neatly under GS3 economy. And finally, Dust Lake and Raimona National Park would go under security and environment respectively. This can really help in structured revision. For the full current affairs article and daily current affairs MCQs, visit insightsonindia.com through the link in the description. Also, subscribe to our Insights IAS YouTube channel and join our official Telegram group using the link provided in the description for all free and important updates related to the UPSC exam. Thank you.